Hello, everyone. My name is Sapira Chirk with the Nevada Arts Council. Today, we have Dr. Elaine Luttrell here to talk about record keeping. Before I introduce Elaine, just a little bit of housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded, and you can use the Q&A function to type in your questions. Elaine, would you, if you like, you can have folks raise their hand throughout to ask question if that works for you. If not, usually we have the Q&A section at the end. You can always type in your question as we go along. So with that, I would love to introduce Dr. Elaine Gorgon-Luttrell. She's the founder of Minerva Financial Art, a company devoted to building financial literacy and empowerment in creative individuals through education and coaching. Her workshops and presentation has been featured nationally by a long list of art funders and advocates. Elaine has experience in both academic and industry setting, and she is a collector of letters and certifications. She holds a doctorate in instructional design leadership, plus active licenses as a certified public accountant with a personal financial specialist designation. She is also an accredited financial counselor and completed a graduate certificate in financial therapy. Elaine is the author of Arts and Numbers. She contributes regularly to industry guides and research journals. She is based in Dublin, Ohio, Kaskaskia and Hopewell Indigenous and Cultural Lands, where she served on the board of the Short North Alliance. Elaine, welcome. Oh, I'm very excited. I need this so bad. Like this time of year is when I actually have to scour through all my bank statements. And I would like to not do that. It's a big pain. So I'm super excited for this webinar. I have my notebooks ready. And by the way, if you miss any of this webinar, it is recorded and it will be shared on our YouTube probably next month. So, all right, Elaine, thank you. Take it away.
You are so welcome, Sapira. I'm so glad you are excited. I hope all of the participants are equally excited because you're right. It's sort of an awful laborious process to gather everything, especially if you're looking at gathering 12 months worth of data. And that's very true for a lot of folks in the arts because we are doing far more important things than gathering and tracking receipts throughout the year. So hopefully, as we go through this, we'll have plenty of useful information to share. And we'll get you on track for 2025 and make 2024 seem not quite as daunting. So welcome, everyone. It's really wonderful to have you here. Thank you for joining us. Our goal today is to possibly build or possibly refine your record-keeping systems and those habits too, because it's not only the system, it's also your action associated with the system while tax season is fresh in your mind or causing active stress, depending on where you are. More specifically, we will call out very specifically the records you need to keep for tax purposes and beyond, because there are some opportunities to think not only about financial records, but other types of records as well. We'll share and list some effective systems. We'll talk through a lot of pros and cons about different systems, because there are plenty of options out there, and there is not a single system that works perfectly for every single person. It really is driven based on kind of your needs and preferences and how you like to work. And then we'll spend some time talking about those ever important habits. As Sapira said, I'm Elaine. I use she, her pronouns, and I am joining you from Ohio today on Kaskaskia and Hopewell Indigenous and Cultural Lands. And all I do is hang out with creative individuals and organizers helping with the business side of creativity. It is such a pleasure to be able to do what I do, and I am by far the luckiest money CPA person ever because of what I get to do. Although we are talking about tax records and answering sort of financial related questions, this information is being provided for educational purposes only and is not intended to be used as tax, legal, or accounting advice. So make sure you know that. And of course, as Spira said, we want to make sure you are taking the space you need to make sure your questions are answered. I have the Q&A box open, so I'll keep an eye on those if anyone has questions to submit. I will also keep an eye on the chat if you want to send any questions via chat. And as Spira said, if you are comfortable raising your hand and participating, I'm happy to engage with you that way as well. Although, since this is being recorded, I fully understand if you want to just share your questions in text form. And also to that end, let's also make sure we are making plenty of space for others to ask their questions as well. I know you might have a lot, and that's amazing. And we'll make sure that everyone has a chance to ask their questions. I will also say we are all equal parts teachers and learners in this space. So if you have great tips to share or systems you love or things that have worked really well for you, please feel free to share those either in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll say them out loud. And also recognize that you are bringing your own expertise to this conversation, which means you get to take all the information and then decide how to apply it in your own creative studio practice. And then lastly, even though this is being recorded, we do ask that any stories that might be shared stay here within the space, although by all means take any lessons from those stories and carry them with you. I'm imagining something someone might share about maybe not saving every single receipt from last year. That's the sort of thing we want to just keep here within the space and not, report on anyone or anything like that. If anyone else has additional ground rules they would like to share, please, by all means, throw them in the chat and I will share them out loud. Otherwise, let's keep going. I wanted to start with sort of this overview of, what you need to know about kind of what types of things you want to retain when we're talking about records, because it can be a very, very broad topic. So the first thing I always think about are money-related records. Certainly, this is any record associated with income you might earn. Maybe it's a grant or a fellowship or an award letter, or maybe it's sales information. If you are doing commissions or making direct sales to individuals, if you're a performer and you're doing gigs and you have contracts and sort of check receipts or income that way, if you're a writer and you have publishing contracts, right? Any records related to income you are earning, you definitely want to keep. And if you are making sales and what you are subject is sales, or what you are selling is subject to sales tax, you definitely want to make sure you are retaining all of your sales tax records as well. Sort of the price of what you are selling, the sales tax collected, and then when it was remitted to whatever sales tax jurisdiction you might need to think about. On the expense side, we want to definitely think about saving records related to those expenses. Certainly that is receipts, right? The IRS loves when you have the original receipt documenting any of your transactions. It might also be, as Sapir mentioned, bank statements and credit card statements that show some of the key information. And if you ever use your personal vehicle for business purposes, you probably want to keep track of mileage as well, specifically business miles driven in your personal vehicle. There could be other things as well, but those are sort of the big categories for the money-related data and records you want to keep. And of course, mostly we keep them for tax purposes. That's a very defensive reason for keeping your records. But it's also really useful to think of maybe a more productive reason for keeping those records, and that's to see some strategic insights from your business, to gut check the prices you are charging, make sure it's all working for you, to prospectively plan or forecast or think strategically about what the future may hold. Those are all really good reasons to have data that you can sort of dig into as well. In addition to financial records, it's also really useful to have information and records about sort of your creative practice, right? I'm broadly calling that your history, right? But those might be grants you've received or applied for, RFPs you've responded to, submissions you've made, awards, different programs you've done, shows you've completed, sort of that total information about your body of work, including your sort of attempted to do type of projects, right? Because we know not every submission is successful, right? So as you think about sort of this history, right, it's important to keep this information or have it accessible, not only so you can know how to expend your energy appropriately and to know, if you've applied for something before, sort of how to kind of dust off that application and do it again, but also to get feedback on some of those applications, particularly the unsuccessful ones for your resumes or CVs as you're gathering them. And then also to sort of demonstrate that you are in fact running a creative business. Now, when we think about being a business or a hobbyist, right, there's a big tax distinction between those things. And in addition to keeping books and records, which is an indicator that you are a business instead of a hobbyist, it's also really helpful to have information about sort of the nature of your business and all the things you are doing to attempt to make money in your field, right? So it's also sort of tax related to keep all of this information as well. We also want to think about information and data related to your time. As part of a creative practice, you certainly have creative time, but there's also administrative time, travel time, and then, of course, personal time as you exist as a human throughout this creative existence, right? And having data about how you spend your time certainly can inform your rates, what you are charging, but also kind of helps you identify the types of projects you want to do and that balance between when you're saying yes to something, what you're saying yes to, and how to sort of prioritize your yeses to move your career forward without burning yourself out. Certainly, it makes sense to keep track of specific inventory items if you are selling inventory or selling goods, or if you are sort of thinking about information about your repertoire or your overall body of work, and that work is documented in some form. It's really helpful to sort of have that saved as well, right? This would be sort of the volumes of work, any details behind any particular piece or a body of work or a performance, the location, maybe where it is, if it has been sold or acquired by someone, right? Or if it is currently in your garage, that's something to know as well. And this is useful for a couple of different reasons. If you are selling something that you produce in multiples, maybe you create limited edition prints or something, and you need to reorder those at a particular time, that's helpful to know. Or if you're a jewelry maker and you want to go into the summer festival season with a particular inventory amount ready to go, it's really helpful to have inventory-like information. It's also really helpful to have it for insurance purposes. So if something happens to your studio space, it's really useful to be able to tell your insurance company how many works were there, when they were created. If you have photographs of them, that's even better, right? So there's also a sort of strategic protection element to keeping records related to your inventory items. And of course, for legacy purposes, it's always nice to have that record of that full body of work. And of course, to convey value and underscore your all the special, unique competencies you are bringing to your creative practice that have been built over time, not only by, but in part by the work you have created. Switching gears slightly, it's really useful to have records around customers or partners. And sometimes those records are contained within your financial records as well. Sometimes they're separate. In a dream world, those systems can talk to each other, right? But we're thinking about contact information, preferences for how they like to be contacted, maybe some sort of contact calendar where you're sort of strategically reaching out, especially to partners over time, as part of a sort of new business development type of task. And we're doing this to basically keep all of those relationships warm, managed, growing, to keep the lines of communication open and to grow or maintain your business depending on what your goals are at any given moment in time. And that, of course, is tied a little bit, but not exclusively, to marketing information, right? Or marketing records we want to keep. Certainly, if you have any type of newsletter or communication that is going out to folks, we want to keep data about how often it's going out, how often it's opened, or what percentage of people are opening it, what are the click-through rates on different aspects of the form, right? What are the conversion rates for when someone clicks to learn more about something? How often does that person then purchase that thing, for example, or book you to do something or hire you to do something, right? Depending on the nature of your business. Retention rates come into play here as well. How often do you have sort of ongoing relationships, and how often are you identifying brand new customers or clients? This is also related to social media engagement. Personally, though, my preference is for you to move any kind of conversations off of a social media platform you don't control and onto something you do control. Mostly, whether it is some sort of, customer tracking tool, or whether it is sort of a platform where you're engaging with folks, or someplace where you can kind of retain the data yourself. And we do that just to spend your time wisely and to make sure you have everything you need to continue developing those relationships and growing your business or maintaining it, depending on where you are. And as I mentioned sort of briefly, a lot of these systems touch money, even if they're not specifically financial systems, right? A marketing system ideally is generating additional income for you, right? In some way, shape, or form. So it's really fantastic if your systems can talk to each other. Why? Because that makes your time be spent more efficiently, right? So, here's a quick example. Let's pretend you apply to participate in some sort of summer festival and you are accepted. That's fantastic, right? We would want kind of that application or the note that you did apply on some sort of history kind of tab, right? And maybe the people you are engaging with get added to some sort of list you are keeping for partners or supporters. Maybe you're interacting or engaging with other creative individuals. This is for a musical example, but it could be visual arts as well or anything else. So are all those peers being added to your system as well, so that you can stay in touch with them? Then as you're preparing the work for the summer festival, what's the sort of documentation of it? Are you keeping that information up to date on your CV, on your website, on kind of your body of work page? And do you need any insurance for the travel or the transportation of an instrument, or any additional insurance as you're thinking about this? And if the answer is yes, are you making sure it's up to date and protecting yourself? And then as you're talking about this thing with your potential customers and clients, right? How is it showing up in a newsletter, or is there a follow-up communication that goes to folks, or some sort of back end something that enables you to continue using this experience to grow your creative career? And again, money touches all of these things. There might be application fees. There would certainly be travel you are booking. Maybe you have costs for additional support or documentation, or other things you have to do. Maybe you need to purchase more insurance, right? Maybe you have a subscription fee or follow-up fees if you're sending, thank you gifts to folks you maybe worked with, right? All of these are probably showing up in your expense system as well, in addition to probably living in some of these other places. And of course, all this stuff takes time, right? So it's really important that you have a sense of the real time it takes to do all of these things to make sure whatever fee you are getting justifies the outlet of the time. So that's sort of an overview of all the different types of systems you might think about. I have some recommendations for a variety of systems that fall into those different categories. But as we think about them, right, probably driven by the financial system, right, which tends to be the most important one, the question really becomes, which system is the best? And I will say there is no best. I wish I could just, speak for 5 minutes and say, use this one, everybody loves it and you'll be fine. But the reality is much more nuanced, because humans work very differently and lots of different creative businesses have different needs. But I can tell you, the IRS says you can use any system specifically to track income and expenses that is suited to your needs, as long as it shows your income and expenses. And I have some examples here of common systems that come up. We will keep talking about lots of these. Some of these are more personal finance tracking systems. You Need a Budget and Empower definitely fall into that category. Rocket Money and Simplify tend to be more personal in nature as well. And we also have some business-like systems: QuickBooks, Wave, FreshBooks, Xero. Those tend to be better suited for tracking only business income and expenses. But honestly, I've seen people do a lot of creative things with different systems based on what they're most comfortable with, right? So any system suited to your needs really does mean any system, but it's up to you to sort of decide what makes the most sense for you. So ultimately, what does that mean? I will say there are some folks who choose to use their own existing bank system as their financial system, right? I have an example here from BB&T, which is a very, very small, teeny tiny regional bank. And even this very small regional bank has built up a really robust website and app to allow its customers to track their income and expenses. So this can be a really good option for someone who is looking for a super simple financial only kind of solution. It will automatically bring in the date of the transaction, the counterparty, and the amount, just because that information is already being gathered by your financial institution. And then almost all of these systems have some sort of like open field. It's usually called a notes field, but it could have some different names, right? This is where you can describe the business purpose of the transaction, right? So let's pretend we go out to lunch and we talk about tax planning for your creative business for 2025, right? There's a very clear business purpose to that particular meal. So when it shows up automatically in my bank system, I would want to type in the notes field, lunch with this person to discuss this topic, right? That's sort of explaining to the IRS if they ever ask, or to your future self if you're curious about your expenses, kind of what the business purpose of these transactions are. Because, of course, the IRS does require that you document the business purpose as part of everything you are keeping track of. Using this existing bank system is really best for someone who wants kind of some automation involved, right? You are not retyping or re-entering all the transactions, right? They're already there in your financial institution. So you're not doing a lot of extra work. You also are probably someone who doesn't want a lot of additional features. Occasionally, I will see bank systems that can send invoices, but that's usually the exception rather than the rule. Usually these systems are just kind of organizing the transactions and letting you add some extra information. If you are very price sensitive, this could be a really good option for you because your bank probably already has this, so it is free for you to use if you like it. I will also say this is usually probably best for someone who has a separate account for their business, right? So this way you could spend the time categorizing all of your business income and expenses without them getting sort of muddied with some of your personal transactions as well. Having said that, I fully recognize there are a lot of creative individuals who do have a single bank account that does include business expenses and personal expenses. You can still use this. It just means you're going to have more categorizing to do, right? Because you're going to also be sorting your personal expenses as well, which is not a bad thing. The other time I've seen this come up for folks is when their financial institution maybe doesn't integrate super well with some of the software options. Many of the software options work really, really well with lots of financial institutions, but sometimes there are exceptions. So for example, Simplify doesn't always work really, really well with business bank accounts. Why? Because Simplify is designed for personal finance needs instead of business finance needs. The same is true for Rocket Money. Or if you are with a very small institution or a credit union, there might not be the infrastructure to support kind of integrating their system with a Rocket Money or Quicken or QuickBooks or something like that. So if your data is with a financial institution that does have some integration issues, it might work best for you just to kind of track everything within your existing bank system. And that is totally and completely fine. I will pause here really fast just to see if there are any questions or anything that has come up. I don't see anything in the Q&A or the chat, but I will pause just in case anyone has some thoughts. If not, I'm going to move on to another option that is a little bit more exciting, right? You can use your existing bank system, but there are some limitations. You can also use a database system. This basically means Google Sheets or Excel or Numbers if you are a Mac user. These products all basically work the same way. Excel is kind of the big boss of them all. It is the most robust, but Numbers and Google Sheets really do kind of what you need them to do from a very basic perspective. And so if you are using one of these systems, you can certainly use a template. There are plenty of templates available, either for free to use downloads, or you can license one that somebody has already created. And to use them the most efficiently, you would export data from your financial institution. So bank statements, credit cards, sort of all that paper, right? You can export it digitally, usually into something called a CSV file. And then that will organize it into columns within Excel, Google Sheet, or Numbers. And then once the data is there, so you're not retyping it all, but you are taking the step to export it and put it into one of these database systems. Then you can add a category column so you can kind of sort the expenses by category. So all of the meals can go into one category, all the supplies can go into one category, travel can go into another category, and you can line these categories up with how they show up on your tax form, right? So you're basically organizing the data so it's the most useful for you to file your taxes and to plan going forward. You can also add another column and add in the business purpose of the transactions. Just like you can do with the bank statement, right? Then you can add in that business purpose to sort of describe the business reason for the transaction. One of the things I really like about these database systems as well is that you can use them to sort of plan and forecast also into the future. Some of the software systems have really nice budgeting components as well. Sometimes, though, the budget doesn't work as well in the software as it does in Excel or Google Sheets. And often that is just because creative world is kind of crazy and all of the software systems want to make a budget very predictable. Like this is how much income you will have every month and this is what you will spend. And we know in a creative life that's not how income and expenses work. So if you're comfortable with Excel, it can be really, really nice to use it for these different planning scenarios so that you can look out at columns maybe for every month for a year and just say, okay, when am I doing different things? When am I going to be paid for them? What kind of expenses am I going to have at different times? It gives you a lot more flexibility. And usually that's really helpful for businesses who don't always have as much predictability as we might like. Joanna has a question in the Q&A. Joanna says, how do we account for artwork creations that you donate to charities, for example, to a silent auction? Are these donations tax deductible for market value or material costs? Joanna, I am very sorry to tell you, you can only deduct the cost of the materials that you are donating to charity. It is not the fair value. Now, the organization might give you a letter that says, Dear Joanna, thank you so much for your contribution. The fair value of what you donated is $2,000. And that is lovely. That is not your tax donation amount, though. You are only allowed to deduct the cost of the materials. Now, that does include all of the materials, whatever the cost of the piece was to create, counting the frame, usually counting transportation or cartage or shipping if you needed to do any of that. All of that would be deductible to you, but it is only the cost, not the fair value. And the way I usually see people track it is they will have a line for charitable contributions or business contributions sometimes. Some people will also put it under sort of advertising or business development, and then they will record the cost in that category with any additional information. And my dream scenario is if you do decide to donate a piece for a silent auction, for example, it would be amazing if the organization would agree to give you the contact information of anyone who happened to bid on your piece. That way, you can say, okay, only one person got it, right? You can certainly send them a nice note afterwards, put them on your mailing list if they're okay with that. And for the 6, 7, 8 14, 35 people who didn't get the work, it feels like a really nice opportunity for you to follow up, maybe invite them to do a studio visit, direct them to some of the other work that's available, right? It feels like a business development opportunity. Now, you can always go to the event as well, and that's lovely, but sometimes having the contact information of people who have expressed an interest in your work is more valuable than just being there. Great question. This database system using Excel or Numbers or Google Sheet is really best for someone who does want the control over the reporting, right? You get to design the system to do exactly what you want it to do in the way you want to do it. So it can be really, really tailored to what you need or want. It's also a good option for someone who is pretty self-motivated and accountable because you are usually the one driving this, right? If you have a bank system you are using, or especially if you're using any software system, they will nudge you occasionally if you haven't logged in for a while, or if maybe there's something for you to review, right? So there will be kind of that external prompt. If you are managing this yourself, you are leaning on your own motivation, which is totally fine, but that's something to know about yourself. This is also a good system, especially if you do not need kind of invoicing capabilities or the option to kind of receive credit card payments. If you need that sort of feature within your business, you're probably going to be looking at some sort of software system that has that baked in and has all the security features for that baked in. But if you want to do that separately, or maybe you have a Stripe integration on your website and you don't necessarily need the details, or maybe if most of your work is kind of contract-based work where you're simply telling someone what they need to pay and then they are giving you the money maybe in a check or following some sort of form like that, that might be perfectly fine to still use Excel for. It's also good for somebody who knows Excel or Google Sheets or numbers, right? You don't necessarily have to be a wizard at Excel, but you need to know some basics, or at least know that you can get comfortable with some basics so that you can use it without tearing your hair out every single time. This is also a really good option if you want to keep track of business and personal things all together, right? There's so much room for customization here. Or if you have multiple kind of aspects to your business and you want to keep track of all of that separately, that can be really helpful. I was working with someone yesterday who has kind of a consulting practice and then a creative practice, and then she also does work through a co-op. So it's really helpful for her to have essentially different columns for these different lines of businesses so that she can keep everything straight, right? So for her, Excel works really well to let her have that separation. This is how I would set it up if I were building something from scratch. It basically contains all the information you have to have for the IRS. So the date of the transaction, the counterparty, the amount, and the business purpose. And then I really like adding a column that has some sort of category name. And this is basically how you're going to sort the data so that you don't have to look at an entire mess of transactions. You're instead looking at categories of transactions. And if you need the detail is there, but you're summarizing it by category, which is how you'll report it on your tax form. I really love standardizing these categories. I would make them match or line up with the tax form you use to file, which is probably Schedule C if you are a sole proprietor or a single member LLC. It could also be a different form if you have an S corporation or if you're part of an LLC that's taxed as a partnership or something like that. But it's really nice to sort of have these expenses not only reflect what comes up in your business, but also line up with your tax form, especially if you are preparing your taxes yourself or if you are sending a report like this to a CPA or an enrolled agent. Data validation lets you do some really cool things, and the sum if formula is one of my favorites as you are summarizing this data. And I'd love to show you an example of what this looks like. This is a link I am happy to drop in the chat. If I can do that quickly, let's see. I should have had it ready to go, but I'll be happy to drop it in the chat to everyone just so that if you'd like to open this up and follow along with me, you can. This is basically a Google Sheet template that you are welcome to save to your own Google Drive. It won't let you edit the live template version, but that's because I don't want you accidentally sharing all of your information with the world. But you can certainly download a copy of this. And where I would direct you is this 2024 detail tab. And to be clear, this is for 2024 information. I'm assuming most of you are like Sapira in the point where you're gathering and organizing all of your data from last year. There's also a 2025 version if you would like to play around with that as well. But the data validation basically means adding these drop downs here so that you can categorize your different transactions. This is set up pretty cleanly, but if you export your data from your bank account and the amount is in a different column, right, you can certainly move these titles around so that you don't have to do any rework as you are exporting what you need. So most of the work happens on this detail tab. And then as we add information, so let's say we're going to have gig income of $5,000 hypothetically for the year. As you add that, it'll automatically be updated on this summary sheet. And this is that sum if formula that I really like, which basically says, okay, Excel or Google Sheets, if you see the word gig income anywhere on this detail sheet, I want you to add up all those numbers next to it so that we can have a real summary of what the income and expenses are for the year. If you would also like to use it as a budgeting tool, you can do that. There are different ways of playing around with it as well. This also has a tab to track your business miles driven. For 2024, the IRS allows you to deduct 67 cents per business mile driven. And so let's pretend you drove 100 miles somewhere. This will calculate that tax deduction, and then it'll roll up here as well, so that it also rolls up eventually to this summary sheet, right? So it's meant to have a lot of what you need in one place. And if you happen to decide that you want to rename a category or have a different type of category, the list of categories is captured here. You are welcome to change them or add them or really tailor this to what you need. And there's sort of a map of sorts here that shows you where these categories often end up on Schedule C. So it is hopefully a good starting point if you are someone who wants to start playing around with Excel or Google Sheets and learning some more. There are plenty of ways to customize this and make it even more robust and even more tailored to your needs. But go nuts and play around with it if you would like. Question in the chat, this person says they are unable to make a copy. Is there a permission to change it? Usually to change it, you have to save a copy of it to your own Google Drive. But if you do not have a Gmail address, that wouldn't be possible. You can, if you have Excel on your computer, you can usually go to that file menu and then download the version of it to an Excel file. I think you could probably open it as a numbers file as well. So if you don't have Google Sheets or Google Drive, you could probably download it and then be able to open it in Excel or numbers. And if those two things don't work, let me know and I'll just email you the Excel version of it as well, if that would be helpful. The other thing you can do with Excel, not to, really, really push you into using Excel, although it's totally magical, is you can really connect it to other data you are tracking. So for example, anytime you have information about counterparties, right, you can keep that data in Excel or Google Sheets as well. This is the contact information you might have. And if you're using something like MailChimp or Constant Contact or another communication tool, you can always upload the data from Excel into those platforms or download the data from those platforms into Excel as sort of like a backup file or something. You want to be careful and make sure you always have permission to add someone to your newsletter list so you don't end up on any of the spam lists. But it's kind of nice to be able to scan through your financial system and say, oh my gosh, this person bought something from me. Are they on my list? And are they categorized on my list as a customer or a partner so that you can tailor those communications? So again, nice to be able to use data in multiple ways. If you are someone who tracks inventory as well, you can also use the financial data as a starting point and then link it to an inventory system or something else, right? And again, this can all be in the same workbook, or it can be in multiple workbooks. As long as they're saved in generally the same place, they usually talk to each other pretty well. Not always, but usually they talk to each other pretty well. So if you wanted to create an inventory tracking system in Excel or Google Sheets, you could certainly do that as well. Keep all the information you would need or want to have captured. You can even take an image of the work and save those images and then even hyperlink it on Excel or Google Sheets so that the image is tied to the data as well. Now we're getting sort of into the weeds of really fancy Excel usage. But once you've sort of built it out and mastered kind of exactly what you need to do, it's not as hard to update as you might think, especially if you are sort of proactive and someone who does this regularly. And even though I love Excel and, it's super powerful and you can do a lot, I also fully recognize that there is an entire world of people who don't like Excel. And that is perfectly fine. Because if the bank system doesn't really offer what you need and looking in Excel drives you crazy and you hate it, same for Google Sheets or numbers or anything else, luckily, there's an entire industry that exists to have built up different systems and options to serve business owners. So I am broadly calling all of these options software systems, right? QuickBooks is sort of the gold standard for business accounting software systems. Wave and FreshBooks are other really good options as well. Wave is especially nice because there is a free version and also a paid version. So a lot of the folks I work with get everything they need out of the free version of Wave. So they get some automation without necessarily having a huge cost associated with it. My Music Staff and Honeybooks are both financial systems that also integrate with customer systems. My Music Staff is typically used by music teachers, although I have seen people in other industries, particularly coaching type of industries, play around with it really effectively as well. And Honeybooks started out for wedding photographers, but it has really expanded to anyone who does any sort of customer-based work, right? So those could be interesting options. I will say the financial side of them is not as robust as you will see in QuickBooks or Wave, but it's also really nice to have the customers and the contracts and everything else sort of incorporated in there as well. So some people end up having multiple systems, other people sort of lean one way or the other based on their needs. Xero is also a really robust business accounting system. It is often more than most people need, but if you are running a really complex business with a lot of moving parts, Xero could be a really good option for you. And then Rocket Money is technically a personal finance option, although a lot of my folks use it to track business expenses as well, especially if you have kind of a personal account with multiple things in there. Rocket Money is mostly used in app form. So if you are someone who likes sort of a system on a computer instead of an app, Rocket Money might not be the best choice for you, but there are lots and lots of different options as well. Here are even more of them. Mile IQ, if you don't want to track your business miles driven in an Excel sheet or Google sheet or a notebook, Mile IQ is an app that people love. I will also say QuickBooks also has a mileage tracking app that some people like to use. The big drawback of having an app on your phone tracking your miles is that you have to have your location and GPS open to that app, right? And so for some people, that's a deal breaker. They're not willing or able to do that. Other people don't really care, right? So you know yourself best and you know how you like to work. I will say though, if you do decide to use something like Mile IQ, make sure once a year or so you are getting the data off the app and into some sort of format that you can hold on to, right? The statute of limitations, so the amount of time that the IRS has to examine your tax return, is 6 years. And that starts on the later of the tax due date or the date you filed your tax return. So if you file an on-time tax return for the 2024 year, your statute of limitations will start on April 15th of 2025, and then it will go 6 years. So 2026, 27, 28, 29, 30, 2031 on April 15th is when that statute of limitation ends. So if you have claimed a tax deduction for business miles driven, and the only data you have to back that up lives on an app that may or may not exist by 2030 or 2031, that could be a problem, right? So you definitely want to, essentially what you do is create a PDF of the data from the app and then save that. Similarly to if you're using any of these other systems, you're also probably going to create a PDF that shows the detailed list of transactions. Again, just in case Wave stops existing before you're audited, you want to make sure you have some sort of access to the data. Usually, though, it mostly comes up for apps like Mile IQ, because that's where sometimes we just really get comfortable with the apps and forget we need to save the data as well. Within Mile IQ, you can also add the business purpose to each of your trips, and that shows up on the PDF export, which is super helpful. If you are someone who's tracking time, Harvest and Toggle, and also My Music Staff have good options for that. If you are someone who likes to do it on paper or with to-do lists, that also works really, really well. If you are tracking inventory, Artwork Archive is usually considered the gold standard for organizing your inventory and your archival kind of materials associated with each work. It doesn't always work super well for people who make multiples of things. It was designed sort of for one-of-a-kind find artists as opposed to folks who make multiples. There are some workarounds, so there are ways to still use it if you make multiples. But this is kind of the gold standard of tracking all the information you need for your inventory. Gist is another option. It's basically an Excel-based system as well. So if that is appealing to you, those are good options. And then tracking customers and partners and marketing kind of information. This can come up in a lot of different ways, depending on kind of your goals and what you're doing. Constant Contact and MailChimp tend to be the two most popular kind of newsletter options that essentially store all of your customer data, right? Or anyone who has been added to your newsletter. And of course, your job is to make sure that anyone you're engaging with is in fact added to a newsletter, and then ideally segmented into different types of folks that you can communicate with, whether they are funders or partners or customers or some other category of just the general public. If you're leaning towards some of these software systems, these tend to be best for someone who really does have that separation of business and personal, right? If you have separate accounts, certainly if you have an LLC or a separate business entity, it might make sense for you to lean more into a software system, especially if you have some extra money to spend in your business. If your business is at a stage where it's still really lean and you really, really have to watch every dollar you're spending, I'd probably lean back towards something like Excel to kind of, or Google Sheets to kind of use and build a system that can work for you without necessarily paying, upwards of $30 or $35 a month for one of these systems. But if your business has moved along enough that, spending $360 a year on something doesn't give you heart palpitations, a robust system is a really good thing to spend that on. Someone who wants the integration is probably going to lean closer to this. So automatically, all of your financial transactions are going from your credit card or your bank account to the system. and the software systems are designed to learn over time. Excel doesn't learn, right? You will always be putting things into categories, but QuickBooks or Wave or FreshBooks or even a Simplify or Rocket Money will learn what types of transactions usually go into what categories, and it will make educated guesses. Now, you have to check those guesses and make sure they're right, but there is some efficiency kind of built into that. These systems also allow you to communicate with customers, to follow up on invoices, to send invoices, to collect credit card payments often. So all of those extra features only exist in the systems, right? You're not going to be able to necessarily do that in Excel. And some of them do have budget systems baked into them as well, but I still find myself going back to Excel to do budgeting and forecasting. So if you are someone who doesn't also mind occasionally using Excel to be able to budget or control exactly what you want, a software system can really be a great option for you. I will pause here in case folks have questions or things they want to make sure to add to the chat. But as we sort of continue some of our content, the next area I want to cover has to do with kind of the pros and the cons of these different systems and the things you should be looking for as you weigh these different options, right? Because again, I'll say it probably 3 or 4 more times, there's no kind of singular best option for every single person. I work with people who use literally everything, including binders with sort of sheet protectors and paper and receipts in them, right? So there is a full gamut of systems, and the IRS says you can use any system suited to your need. So when we're looking at a bank or a database or a software system, if we're looking at automation, there's some automation with the bank system. There's a lot with the software system. And with a database system, there can be some automation once it's built, but you are still kind of initiating everything. The bank system is usually pretty easy to use. You're already banking with that institution, so it doesn't require any extra. The software systems are also generally pretty easy to use. They are not always super intuitive, so sometimes getting set up with one takes a little bit of time. That's also sometimes a really good time to hire an expert in the system or a bookkeeper to kind of get you up and running and sort of help you know what tasks you need to do. I would say that's especially true if you are going to lean into QuickBooks, which is one of the least intuitive of the systems. But if you are someone who is generally comfortable with user interface and design, you can probably figure out how to make most things work on Wave or some of the other common platforms. And a database system really depends on you. The more you know Excel and the more you are sort of comfortable with coding and that type of things, the easier it is. The software systems really have an advantage when it comes to support. Almost all of them have customer support, built-in support. Sometimes it's chat-based, sometimes it's human-based. Generally, I have found the more you pay for the software system, the better and more accessible the support is, which is kind of frustrating, especially if you were just trying out something or playing around with a free version. But often too, they will have communal support. So, other users will have answered questions or offered tips or filmed even videos or little tutorials on different things. So usually with the software systems, there is support available. You just sometimes have to dig a little bit more for it. There are a ton of great Excel tutorial videos that I love. MrExcel.com is one of my favorites. So there's a lot of good stuff there. And then the support for your financial institution really kind of depends on the financial institution. I have found the support options for banks to be sort of the least robust of the three, but there are plenty of exceptions out there. The bank system is free. An Excel or Google Sheet system is often free. I have Ish here in case you do lean into Excel and need to subscribe to the Microsoft Office system, which would not be free, or if you are paying for a licensing tool or a database that somebody else has created. It might not be totally free all the time, but it's real close. And with 1 or 2 exceptions, like the free version of Wave, most of the software platforms are not free. So that's another potential drawback. And then that integration piece, right? The software will usually give you the most integration, and then you might have some or a little bit of integration with some of these other options as well. So as you think about evaluating different potential systems, definitely start with what you are looking for, right? If you are looking for a personal finance system, a business finance system, or one that will do both, that might nudge you in a direction. Something like QuickBooks or Wave is pretty much only for business transactions, where something like Simplify or Rocket Money can do both pretty well often, especially if you're willing to sort the categories. A system like YNAB, You Need a Budget, or Empower, which used to be called Personal Capital, those are designed to be personal systems. So, depending on what you need and what you're really interested in tracking, that might nudge you in a particular direction. Invoicing customers or accepting credit card payments will usually push someone into a software system. Or if you already have Stripe or Square or another system that you use regularly to collect payments, I would start by looking to see what systems are already integrated with whatever you're using. Stripe is pretty universally integrated, but there are exceptions as well. So, the fewer things you have to change, the better. Think about sort of how you need it to communicate with any other systems you have. Stripe is a great example of that, or even something like MailChimp. Is it easy to take the customer data from QuickBooks and move it into MailChimp, or is that a cumbersome process? It's also interesting to note kind of how many transactions you have. If you have a lot of transactions, and if they are very different types of transactions, I would probably lean towards some sort of software system. But if you have a relatively low number of transactions, or if you have a lot that are like similar types of transactions, like every year you might have 500 transactions, but 400 of them are purchasing supplies from the same supply store, right? Then it might make sense to track all of that in Excel or Google Sheets, just because it's a little bit easier to just kind of sort through that. And then also, how do you like to work? Are you more drawn to an analog approach? Do you like something that's a little bit more automated? How comfortable are you with automated systems? How frustrated do you get if some of the kind of integration with your bank fails, right? Does that drive you crazy? In which case, I might nudge you back towards something like Excel. Or are you happy to kind of relink, right? In which case, a software system might be okay for you. Definitely consider the cost. There will always be some sort of intro option that is way more affordable than it will be over time, but it's really annoying to switch systems. So you probably want to make a choice and then stick with it for at least a period of time. So make sure you know what the cost is after all those sort of promo prices end. And also in terms of your time, how much time are you really going to be spending on it? If there is a free version, or for a system that is totally free. I'm thinking about Rocket Money, maybe without the subscription piece, or Mint doesn't exist anymore, but when Mint was an option, it was completely free. And as we know, if something is free, that probably means you or your data is the product that's being sold, right? So make sure you are clear with how your data is being used, especially for the free options, but also increasingly for the non-free options that are incorporating AI analysis, or other things like that. I'll share an example. I'm a QuickBooks user, and QuickBooks has recently invited me to let their AI start drafting kind of reminders to folks who maybe haven't paid their invoices yet. That tells me that QuickBooks or some system within there is reading all of the information and gathering it, right? I don't know that they are selling that, but they're definitely gathering it and using it, right? So make sure you are clear on how your information is being used and what kind of protections you can put in place to stop that if that's not something you're interested in. I would also encourage you to look into the support features. Um, Sometimes some platforms have free support. Sometimes the free support is just what other people have shared. And to get a bookkeeper or someone who's actually really more hands-on, sometimes that's an additional cost. Sometimes it's worth it, but if you choose a system, I don't want you to be surprised by additional costs that come up. We also want to think about sort of the communication, right? Can you control how the system is communicating with you and others? Do you prefer to work on a phone or a tablet or on a desktop or laptop? Is the system accessible across all those different platforms? If you're using it to send invoices and all your clients or customers use their phones, does the invoice look all wonky or is it adaptable, right? These are all sort of aspects of the system that you also want to consider. I really like a system that will push information to you. So if it's been a month and you haven't logged in, will Wave or the other system say, "Dear business owner, how are things going? It's probably time to categorize these transactions," right? That can be really helpful. Rocket Money is known for doing this really well. And I will say, I don't actually love the level of communication from Rocket Money. I find it anxiety producing. But one of my writer clients loves it. She loves getting the notification on her phone that says, "Hey, you just had coffee. Want to record that as an expense?" So she finds that very comforting and useful. I don't like that, right? So definitely know how the information is sort of communicated. If there are a lot of push transactions or notifications, can you turn them off, right? Or are you required to pull the data from the system, in which case you probably want to mark your calendar to do that on some sort of ongoing basis. Also useful to know what happens if you want to switch systems. How easy is it to download, retain, and save all the data if you want to go to a different platform or system? And then maybe most importantly, who do you know who's using it, right? The support from the company can be great, but if, the artists in all of the studios around you are all using the same system, you can also go to each other for support and troubleshooting and issues, which can be really, really helpful. And then, of course, you might have other things you want to know as well. So there's plenty of room for you to also sort of define your own criteria. We'll pause here again. I haven't seen any additional messages come through the chat or the Q&A, but I still have it open in case you are actively typing. But where I want to take us next is into sort of the habit piece to kind of keep the record keeping system going, because it is really tempting to say, I just need a better system, or if I only had QuickBooks, I would be up to date all the time, or something like that. But the reality is the systems all have pros and cons associated with them. And so it's often that human habit piece, right, that is the difference maker, as opposed to believing that there is one ideal system that will suit you best. A craft artist that I love, who's really, really fantastic, certainly creatively, very strategic. She keeps switching systems because she keeps believing that, well, Wave didn't work for me, so QuickBooks might, or that didn't work, so Simplify might, right? She keeps switching systems, thinking that she will finally find one that makes her life magical and perfect. And the reality is they all have pros and cons, and sometimes it's just that human piece that is the difference maker, because ultimately they all kind of do the same thing, right? So don't forget about kind of the habit piece. So when we think about setting effective habits and the fresh start effect with January or a new tax year and sort of going into some of these new things, we want to think about the frequency of the different tasks you need to do. So when we're thinking about updating these things, you probably have some weekly tasks, some monthly tasks, and some quarterly tasks. This is very, very flexible. I think updating your financial records once a month makes sense for a lot of people. You could probably think about updating them quarterly, depending on the volume of transactions. And I do also have some folks that update their financial systems weekly, simply because it's easier for them to keep track of a weekly habit instead of a monthly one. But For your inventory, I'd probably think about quarterly updates. And for, your history or your CV, you could probably even do this twice a year or annually, right? But I wouldn't let it stretch too much further than that. And then marketing and sort of customer communication or partner communication really depends on you. I like sort of batching my communications into a monthly task and then sort of scheduling them out. But certainly some people prefer to do that weekly as well. And what we're going for here is, really that Goldilocks zone. We want you to stay on top of things without letting any of these tasks become sort of obsessions for you, right? Because if you're spending more time updating your financial system than you are making creative work each week, there's something wrong about that balance. It's also interesting to think about, really what needs to be done and how long does it take. At its sort of most fundamental, you want to be making sure your expenses are in the right categories. You want to be keeping your mileage log updated, sending invoices if that's part of your practice, following up with people who haven't paid you, probably reconciling those bank accounts just to make sure you're capturing all the data, and then comparing your real data against your budget, right? Especially in flexible years or years with a lot of uncertainty, just to make sure things are on track. And realistically, you can do this in about 2 hours a month, whether that's spread out throughout the month or if you sort of dedicate a 2 hour block on your calendar, periodically. So, that's my estimate. Some people might take longer or shorter than that, but as you pay attention to what really needs to be done, and as you do it with some frequency, make sure you're setting aside the time for that. And to that end, I want to make sure you're doing these tasks at a time when you don't otherwise do your best creative work, right? So if you are a morning person and you wake up and go straight to the studio and dive right in, that's amazing. You probably want to be updating your numbers maybe in the afternoon or the evening, or maybe even on a weekend, right? When it's not taking away from your creative time. Or on the flip side, if you like a slow, gentle start to your day and your best creative time is a bit later, maybe with a cup of coffee in the morning, you do some categorizing of expenses, right? Because it's working a different part of your brain, and it's a little bit easier to do it when you're not in the flow of something you actually want to be doing. I mentioned marking this on your calendar. That's a really great accountability tool. I would highly suggest that you hold yourself accountable and block off the time, because it is very easy to get distracted with other tasks. And before you know it, it'll be January of 2026 and we'll be having this conversation, right? So put it on your calendar now to help hold yourself accountable going forward. And speaking of that accountability, there's a lot of great research around how to hold ourselves accountable, right? And there are different strategies that work well for different people. So I really like a good reward strategy. I like a nice cup of coffee paired with a task that I maybe don't want to do. Some people are also really motivated by sort of to-do lists and checking things off. So, if you are motivated by that positive reinforcement, right, there are some strategies there you can use. Some people have accountability buddies. That is a really, really wonderful strategy if you have some folks that are on the same page as you are, and if you will hold each other accountable. If everybody is a procrastinator in the group, it might not work so well, but setting up time to do a task with a friend or sharing the status of the task with a friend to hold each other accountable is really useful. We see these coming up with like online options as well. You can find a stranger that's actually an accountability buddy. And some people really like that because it feels a little less vulnerable if it's not someone kind of in your immediate circle. So different ways of doing this depending on whether or not this is something that works for you. Sort of the opposite of the positive reinforcement is sort of reminding yourself about why you are doing this. So it's keeping sort of the misery of going through a year's worth of data front of mind. Maybe if that is particularly painful this time of year as you're preparing for taxes, is there a way to kind of remind yourself of, you're doing this for your future self, or you're doing a favor for your future self so that the 2025 tax season goes a little bit more smoothly. It's not quite as positive as, getting yourself a really nice cup of tea as you're doing the task, but for some folks, that can be really motivating as well. And then also having visuals, whether it's a visual reminder of, dear future self, I love you enough to keep my records up to date as like a sign in your studio, right? Or maybe it's sort of keeping track of the number of weeks that you have checked in with your financial system or months that you have checked in with your financial system. It can be really motivating to kind of see that accumulation happen over time throughout the year. So visuals, remembering the downsides and protecting your future self against them, definitely leaning into some peer support and bribing yourself or motivating yourself with something positive. Those can all be really effective strategies to keep yourself accountable throughout the year. So with that, we have sort of concluded the official content I had prepared for you today. I'm curious to know if we missed anything, if folks have additional questions we want to cover. We have a bit of time reserved for that, so please do not be shy if you have additional questions to add to the Q&A or the chat, or if you would like to raise your hand and share a question as well. I don't see any right now. Sapira, have I missed anything, or are you seeing something I am not?
No, I don't see any questions at this moment. I thought that was super informative, and not only did you cover all the things I'm thinking about that relates to money, but I never think about like the things that touches money but is not money that I need to like really pay attention to. So that was really, really good to know and to keep front of mind. And I will say like I don't ever track where my paintings are. They're somewhere. Like which one's sold? I don't know. Here's the I have the photos. That's the inventory, you know. So that is like some things that are like really, really important for me to think about. Especially with insurance you were mentioning, and I think about all the artists that lost, their studios and their homes in the LA fires. Like that is something that I definitely need to do and think about in my own
Yeah.
practice. So
It's
that was
devastating. Yeah.
yeah, it's
To
terrible.
Joanna's question earlier too, if someone did have some sort of catastrophic loss, for tax purposes, the loss we recognize isn't the fair value of the artwork, right? It's also the cost, just like Joanna's questions about sort of donations. And most insurance companies insure work at its cost
Mm,
instead of at its fair value, right? So those are all really, again, like you said, money adjacent things that are super useful to think about before you are in a terrible crisis, right? Because in a terrible crisis, we only want to be thinking about healing and care for ourselves and care for others, right? You don't want to be thinking about valuing your inventory.
exactly. Exactly. That was really, really, really informative. Thank you so much. I know I will be rewatching this.
I
Um,
hope
hope,
so. I hope
yeah,
so. Joanna has shared a helpful tip too. Joanna says she keeps a running list of exhibitions and what paintings are there, and she keeps adding to the list with all the details. And so she has highlighted on the list kind of what's out there and kind of where it is. Joanna, I love that, especially sort of as your acquisitions and sales and collections increase, right? The more a piece is exhibited, the more zeros we add to the price. It's not always a linear relationship, right? But I love that you have all of that data. That's a great way to do it. Here's a quick recap on the screen of what we covered today in case you're curious, and I will simply lead or leave with gratitude. Thank you so much for your time today, for your questions, for your thoughtful insights, and most of all, thanks to the Nevada Arts Council for facilitating these conversations. So, Spira, back to you.
Thank you so much, Elaine. That was really informative. Again, everyone, thank you for attending. This will be on our YouTube probably mid next month. And you can find more information and more recorded webinar on our YouTube as well. So be sure to check it out and follow Elaine on all of your social media. Elaine, what are they?
Oh, Minerva Fin Arts is how I am on most platforms. And I'm not super active there, if I'm being perfectly honest. But I do have a newsletter, so I send out tips for financial tips in different topics once a month or so. So yeah, Minerva Financial Arts is the website.
Cool. Thank you. And be sure to check out her book too. If you have any questions, you're more than welcome to email me and I can forward it. With that, thank you so much. And then we will see you all later.
Thank you.
Thank you.